Ungax and Daala stood by the radar screen, their full attention focused on the upper atmosphere of Edor 35. The humans are late. Ungax was not using a translator. After years of training, he had learned how to use the color-shifting properties of his dewlap to mimic the brightness patterns of the Udi language, the language of Daala's species. Daala caught his question through her peripheral vision. He could tell she understood him through the contemplative color she was expressing via the X-shaped crevices in her face, her chromatic node. The single eye in the middle of this bioluminescent organ landed on him, and it took his absolute focus to understand what words that particular combination of colors would translate to. If the humans don't come, we should give up. Ungax's dewlap flickered with determination as he conveyed, "We cannot abandon this, Daala." His struggle with the complexities of her language was evident. "To secure the resort loan, we must decipher the Murloc migration patterns. We will accomplish this with or without the help of the humans." Daala stared at him with her single eye, saying nothing. Her chromatic node turned dark as she moved toward the window of their tiny research outpost. Only after long moments of watching the wild planet's surface did she turn to him again, her face changing colors in rapid succession. "We can't do this without help. This is not a death world, but is not a normal planet. Anything outside can harm us. No amount of credits is worth our lives." Ungax couldn't believe her. This was their one-in-a-lifetime chance to jump from the bottom to high society within the Federation. Was there ever such a thing as a reward without risk? The only reason he wasn't rude was because he wasn't good at expressing anger properly in her language. He forced himself to calm down, readying his dewlap to express a long argument. "How dare you suggest giving up after all we've endured for this planet?" Ungax's dewlap pulsed with anger. "Do you have no recollection of our countless years of toil? Have you forgotten the countless times our careers were destroyed because of our relationship? Can you ignore my exile for loving you?" Ungax was uncertain if he had gotten the syntax and semantics right, but they had been together long enough that she could understand past his mistakes. "Don't you wish to see the expression on your family's faces when we get richer than any of them?" The corners of Daala's chromatic node shone bright white, her face looking like it would burst. When she finally spoke, the brightness of her bioluminescence had reached what Ungax internally classified as dangerous levels. "I wouldn't be here if I didn't wish to see that. Building a resort here will get us rich, but what good will it do if we're inside the belly of a Murloc? We need help, Ungax. If the humans don't show up, we must hire other Deathworlders to help us, not go outside alone." A cold shiver ran down his body. Daala was not fully aware of their financial situation, but the resonance barrier keeping the Murloc outside their research station had taken a good chunk of their remaining credits. And besides, the deal with the humans was made on the terms of half the payment up front, leaving them with insufficient credits to hire another team. Worse yet, Ungax feared they had been scammed. No other species besides the humans had accepted going to Edor 35 for the amount they offered, which in hindsight looked suspicious. If the humans didn't appear, the remaining credits they had were only enough to pay for their tickets to leave the planet, and maybe the unbelievably high shipping costs of the research outpost, something they would be lucky to sell for half of what they paid for it if nothing broke during transport. "If you're afraid of some Murloc, you can stay here while I go out there and put the trackers on the Murloc myself." He was not about to go back to their old life anytime soon. His days of struggling to keep a job because his partner was from another planet were over, and Edor 35 would solve his problem one way or another. While Daala's emotions were shining all over her chromatic node, Ungax rushed to collect his blaster and portable prismatic barrier. As he was looking for the tracking devices for the Murloc, however, a tiny light on the radar screen caught his attention. Daala noticed this as well, and before he could warn her to tone down her expectations, against the possibility that it could be the debt collectors coming for them because of the loan they took to buy the planet, her chromatic node lit up. "The humans are here!" He was about to mention the debt collectors, but the more he saw her happiness, the harder it got for him to do so. After all, he and Daala could bicker all day and sometimes have big disagreements where they lost track of what they were saying. But there was a reason for them to be together for so long. and still be able to afford a planet, considering the harsh circumstances they were given. Unconsciously, Ungax found himself standing beside Daala, their hands seeking solace as they watched the diminishing blip on the radar screen. Only when the dot vanished from sight did they rush towards the door, their steps synchronized. A press of a button revealed the familiar expanse of their research station, now unexpectedly occupied by a spacecraft. Daala's chromatic node was beaming, her happy words flowing faster than he could catch them. Ungax, however, was stunned as a group of humans, clad in green and black, disembarked from the spacecraft and advanced towards their research station. As they neared the resonance barrier, Ungax observed their facial expressions morphing into contorted grimaces, and when they drew closer still, they collectively raised their hands to the sides of their heads. The human group halted at the resonance barrier, their eyes fixated on the structure with an intensity reminiscent of the Murloc, as if they were contemplating its destruction. This was unforeseen. The resonance barrier was designed to repel only the aggressive predators of Edor 35, not other life forms. Sharing a glance with Daala, Ungax made a swift decision to approach the humans, despite the peculiar circumstances. They sprinted the short distance to the gate, arriving in moments. As they stood before the humans, Ungax was struck by the realization that he had left his universal translator inside the research station. He turned to retreat and fetch the translator when a small pebble struck his back. Spinning around, he found one human holding aloft a flat screen displaying a message in familiar script. It said, "Turn off that thing or we're walking out." No number of humans inside the research station could shake off Ungax's worry. Daala had complied with their demand to turn off the resonance barrier, and now he felt vulnerable. Was it some kind of Deathworlder pride that led them to make this request? The humans had promised to keep them safe, but Ungax wasn't feeling reassured. To begin with, Leo, the leader of the group, seemed unable to focus on a conversation. He would constantly complain about some of their equipment being annoying, and Daala would have to turn it off before the conversation could resume. The other 5 gave off a strange vibe entirely. Ungax noticed that while Leo sat at the table with him and Daala, the others were continuously moving their mouths. He figured this was how they communicated, through sequences of lip movements instead of color changes. But the strange thing was that they didn't bother looking at each other while their mouths moved. This made them appear like a group of crazed individuals, everyone projecting their thoughts, yet no one paying any attention to what the others were saying. Their financial situation didn't allow them to be picky, but could these humans really protect them against the Murloc? To find the answer, he posed a question to Leo, his dewlap conveying his words. "What gives you the confidence to turn off the resonance barrier?" Daala shot him a look of disapproval, but Ungax stood his ground, staring at Leo and waiting for a reply. The human's mouth began to move, and words were rendered on the screen in his chest. "You might not understand how, but we can locate any Murloc that gets close before we see them." Not understand how? Ungax felt patronized. Did the human think him too primitive to grasp their methods? His species might not be from a death world, but they had survived the galaxy's dangers long before humans even ventured into space. He didn't need to understand their precise methods. He only needed reassurance that they worked. But still, this arrogance irked him. "Perhaps I don't," Ungax finally responded, his dewlap switching colors non-stop. "But if you're so confident in your technology, then you should have no trouble proving it works before we step out into the wilds." Daala threw another disapproving glance, and this time she joined the conversation. "You were ready to step out alone, and now you're worried? Why do you have to be like that?" Ungax felt a surge of anger, only to have it subside when she added, in a very faint light that only he could see, "They are Deathworlders. Be nice to them." Ungax recognized her concern and immediately decided to apologize for his tone. He scrambled for words. However, Leo's translator illuminated with a message. "There's nothing wrong with being concerned for your safety. If you don't mind an explanation that might be a lot for you to take in, we don't mind telling you how we can identify danger without seeing it." Ungax and Daala exchanged a meaningful glance, both expecting different behavior from a Deathworlder. The tension in the air eased as Ungax recognized some concern in Leo's offer. He lowered his dewlap, a gesture of humility in his culture. I apologize for my earlier tone, he conveyed, his colors shifting to a soft, calming hue. Your methods may be unusual, but that doesn't mean they aren't valuable. Please, explain how your technology works. We need every advantage if we're to survive this planet. While the couple watched attentively, Leo's mouth started to move. This is where it might start getting weird for you. Let me ask you a few questions first. Are you aware of radio waves? Ungox was thrown into confusion. Of course we are. Leo continued. What about gravitational waves? Ungox couldn't understand why the human was asking these questions. Perhaps the human truly did see him as primitive. Still, he replied, We knew of them long before your species learned how to make fire. His reply earned him an angry glare from Daala. Leo didn't seem bothered, though. His mouth moved, and the translator continued. To measure gravitational waves, radio waves, and even sound waves, your species needs all sorts of modern tech, correct? Ungox was truly angry now. Why were they asking something so obvious? His reply didn't show it, however. Correct? We humans don't. Leo and every other human in the room showed their teeth in unison. The translator then produced a new stream of text. At least not for sound waves. We have an organ that can capture vibrations in the air. 2, actually. Leo's fingers pointed to the pair of protrusions on their heads. Our brains even have a dedicated area to make sense of those vibrations. We call it the auditory cortex. Time seemed to freeze for Ungox. He was stunned, but Daala reacted differently. She stood, her chromatic nodes shining rapidly. The resonance barrier. Just as it does to the Murlac, it was overloading your senses. Leo remained seated, the translator screen displaying a single word. Precisely. Ungox was still frozen, his mind a mess of questions. How did beings capable of perceiving vibrations see the world? Did they use that for communication? If his physics classes didn't betray him, in theory, they could communicate through walls or even in the middle of fog. Maybe they could even locate where the vibrations were coming from. But all of that would depend on one thing. How sensitive is your organ? He stood, his colors conveying the importance of the question. For some unknown reason, however, Leo touched his forehead and shook his head. This happened as all the other humans showed their teeth, their expressions somehow looking less serious than before. I apologize for my crew. They're too immature for this conversation. Leo's mouth kept moving as words appeared on the screen in his chest. To answer your question, our sensitivity to sound waves is good enough to detect a heavy Murlac's steps from quite a distance. Even both of you would be fairly easy to notice from afar, given how much sound you unknowingly produce. When Leo finished explaining, Ungox was impressed, so much so that he now felt it was a good decision to hire the humans. If they had the same senses as the Murlac, they might be a greater asset than any cheap equipment. Perhaps they could even help solve the puzzle of the Murlac's migration patterns, reducing the time they would need to spend researching the planet before the bank would consider investigating. If he felt fear when the humans requested the deactivation of the resonance barrier, now all he felt was curiosity about how the human sound detection would fare outside the theoretical field. After all, this might be his and Daala's chance to uncover the migratory patterns of the Murlac and prove once and for all that this rock had value. Edor 35 was a vast landscape filled with curious structures. Rising from the ground, slender stalks towered over most of the rocky terrain, dwarfing Ungox, Daala, and the humans. At the top of each stalk, a wide circular canopy unfurled, delicately curved downward at the edges, as if to shield the fragile underside from the elements. Walking side by side with Daala, Ungox gripped his blaster and portable prismatic barrier tightly. Daala, on the other hand, carried only a laser gun, a weapon the humans had deemed ineffective against the Murlac. Leo led the group, accompanied by the 2 other humans, all carrying heavy-looking guns that appeared to be made entirely of solid metal. Another 3 humans guarded their rear. Ungox had been told this formation was meant to keep them safe, and when he asked if they would flee in the face of danger, Leo had merely joked that they wouldn't consider it until they'd collected the other half of their payment. Even if it wasn't a joke, The remark made Ungox feel a bit safer. As they navigated the dark maze of stalks, Ungox noticed the first practical advantage of sound detection. Unlike him and Da'ala, the humans never took their eyes off the path. Their method of communication didn't require constant eye contact, allowing their eyes to dart around, scanning for potential threats. Ungox was trying to gauge the range of the humans' communication when Da'ala's chromatic node lit up, conveying her words to him. "Did you remember to bring the trackers, Ungox?" Her question annoyed him. "Of course I remembered the trackers. Leo is carrying them, and he even promised he had a safe way to attach them to the Murlac." Her chromatic node emitted a faint light. "So you trust them now?" Ungox was puzzled. Earlier, she had urged him to be nice, and now she was questioning him. Sometimes he couldn't understand her at all. "What's the problem, Dala?" He noticed the humans weren't paying attention, so he continued. "You know they're behaving well for Deathworlders. Why bring this up now?" Her chromatic node glowed with concern. "I've been thinking, if something happens to us on this planet, we lose our claim, and anyone else could bid for it." Her light dimmed as her eyes fixated on him. "When the humans realize that the Murlac's migration patterns are the key to identifying valuable areas for development, they might see us as the only obstacle to claiming this planet for themselves." She had a point. Normally, Ungox would have been the one to catch such a detail, but right now, their future hinged on the decency of the humans, if such a thing existed. He turned to her, his dewlap subtly shifting colors. "We're broke, my love. Our own species won't help us, and without the humans, this planet's a dead end. We're betting everything on their good intentions and unusual skills. Okay?" Ungox patted her back, and while she didn't respond immediately, she eventually held his hand, signaling her agreement. Their journey continued until they were deep in Murlac territory, where Leo suddenly stopped at the front and raised his hand, showing his palm, a gesture they had agreed upon earlier. Ungox and Da'ala raised their weapons, but there was no immediate threat in sight. The humans, however, were scanning the surroundings, their guns pointed toward the maze of slender stalks. Leo was the first to lock his aim in one direction, and just as Ungox began to doubt there was anything there, a Murlac as tall as Leo's waist emerged from the shadows. The four-legged creature charged at Leo with surprising speed, its elongated limbs stretching and contracting fluidly despite its soft jelly-like body. Its long neck swayed with each stride, and the eyeless creature's wide-open mouth seemed ready to engulf Leo. In Ungox's mind, he had already imagined Leo firing at the powerful creature. However, he was soon reminded of what it meant to be a Deathworlder. Instead of shooting, Leo waited until the Murlac was nearly upon him, then delivered a single heavy punch that knocked the creature out cold. With the Murlac on the ground, Leo aimed his gun at a fatty spot on the creature's rear. Carefully lining up the shot, he squeezed the trigger, and the gun's muzzle flashed to life. Ungox and Da'ala exchanged a stunned glance at the unexpected display of violence, but their shock quickly subsided as the Murlac scrambled back onto its feet and bolted, a tiny hole in its back the only evidence of its close call. Ungox began to grasp the situation when he noticed a small light flickering on his wristband, indicating a signal from the first tracker. Da'ala noticed as well, and she conveyed the thought that Ungox's mind was still struggling to accept. Leo might have shot the tracking device into the Murlac. Ungox found it hard to believe the absurdity of what had just happened, and before he could fully process it, more Murlacs emerged from the shadows. The other humans tracked the creature's movements before they even appeared, and like Leo, refrained from shooting, opting instead to fight them with fists and kicks. While Leo effortlessly dispatched the first Murlac with his bare hands, his companions found the task more challenging. Some resorted to using the butts of their guns to subdue the blind creatures, steadily increasing the body count. Meanwhile, Leo calmly observed the fray, occasionally intervening to shoot tracking devices into the creatures or assist his companions in their fight. They watched this fearless display of efficiency with awe, barely able to believe their eyes. Ungox even lowered his blaster and prismatic barrier, finally grasping the difference between him and a Deathworlder, a being born in a world so fiercely competitive that relying on a single sense wasn't enough to survive. The fight continued until Leo ran out of trackers, at which point He threw a small metallic sphere marked with yellow symbols into the maze of stalks where the Murlocs were emerging. Ungok saw a flash of light from that direction, and soon after, even the defeated Murlocs fled, and none of them dared to approach again. Leo returned to them, taking a moment to adjust his translator to face them. "Well, unless you've got a few more trackers to shoot, that concludes our deal." Ungox and Daala exchanged a meaningful glance, and he conveyed his thoughts. "We're grateful for your assistance and impressed by your vibration detection organ." Daala's chromatic note flashed with colors. "If we'd known Deathworlders could scare off the Murlocs so easily, we wouldn't have bothered with the resonance barrier." Leo's mouth moved, and the translator displayed his response. "How much did you pay for that thing?" The other humans gathered, seemingly interested in the conversation. Ungox and Daala rarely discussed personal matters, especially with Deathworlders. But after witnessing how easily one of their biggest problems had been solved, Ungox decided to share a little. "We paid 30,000 for the barrier, plus another 20 for shipping." Leo exchanged glances with the other humans, then opened up as well. "Really? When the guys and I heard someone had bought our favorite planet, we decided to come see it one last time. But imagine our surprise when we found just 2 business partners running the show from a tiny research outpost." At the time, Ungox and Daala had no idea that their next decision would change the course of their lives forever. They couldn't have known that the sentence that had always made their lives more difficult would, for the first time, win them the sympathy of this group of humans, eventually leading to a long-lasting friendship. This sentence was expressed by Daala, who exchanged a complex look with Ungox before her chromatic node flashed a short sequence of colors. "We are actually a couple." 12 local years later, Ungox stood behind the bar's counter, its design inspired by the many things he and Daala had seen on their numerous trips to a certain blue death world. Beside him, the glass walls provided an unobstructed view of their mountain resort on Edor 35, a breathtaking sight that had been carefully chosen by the couple with both security and practicality in mind. As he did every day at sunset, Ungox slowed his work to savor the view. Even after all those years, he remained captivated by the reflective circular canopies, which looked like a sea of exotic colors from the high vantage point in the mountains. His dewlap relaxed as he recalled the countless hours spent planning the sanctuary. It had been their dream to create a place where beings from different worlds could coexist in harmony, a place where the exotic flora and fauna of Edor 35 could be appreciated without fear. And as he watched the sunset dip below the horizon, casting the resort in a golden hue, he knew that they had achieved their goal. A sudden chill crept into Ungox's contentment as he noticed Daala emerging from the garden, accompanied by a quartet of Aelir, the same species as his beloved wife. The familiar tranquility of his evening was shattered, replaced by a growing unease. As Daala approached, her expression was a subtle mask of composure, yet her eyes held a silent plea for aid. Ungox, with a keen understanding of her unspoken language, recognized the telltale signs of distress. The 4 individuals trailing behind her confirmed his suspicions. They were the kind of clientele that could turn a serene evening into an ordeal. That much was clear. The group was led by a towering female whose chromatic nodes was already a kaleidoscope of shifting hues. Before they had even reached the bar, she began her tirade. "Why have you brought us to an Oloth? We demand to speak with your manager. This is unacceptable. We need someone who can solve our problem, not a trip back to our rooms for translators." Ungox noticed Daala was nearing her breaking point, the tones in her chromatic node barely containing her anger. "He is my husband. He will understand you better than anyone with a translator." Ungox saw the glint of disgust spread across their faces, the same pattern he and Daala had seen countless times over the years whenever they mentioned they were together. The female turned to him, and he guessed what she would say before any color change began. "Him understanding us, as if an Oloth could ever grasp the intricacies of our language." Being much more careful than usual with his language, Ungox projected their language through his dewlap. "Pardon the inconvenience, dear customers. How can I assist you on this wonderful day?" He received a set of surprised gazes from the group, but what really caught his attention was the obvious look of disapproval from the tall female. She first threw that look to the rest of the group to ensure they hid their surprise, then turned back to him, pretending to be unimpressed. "Are you really the manager?" Ungox and Daala were the owners of the resort and the planet, but very few of their customers knew this. They employed many members of their species, and when a customer ended up in front of them, it most likely meant they would have this sort of unpleasant interaction. "Yes, I am the manager." He had repeated that sentence so many times, it was second nature. "What issue brings you here?" The tall female stared at him, and then her chromatic node came to life, changing colors almost faster than his eyes could follow. "Your employee does not allow us into the lower gardens. They say that's off limits for our species." Ungox had heard all sorts of complaints before, but this was a new one. The fact that most of Edor 35 was dangerous was common knowledge, and most individuals wanted to stay as far from the dangers as possible. "I'm sorry, but the lower gardens and the forest are forbidden. The Murlac is aggressive, and the lower gardens are too close to their migration path." Her chromatic node shone again. "We saw a group of humans entering the gardens, and your employees let them do whatever they want in there. Why are they allowed in and we aren't?" This time, Ungox felt he might lose this argument, as even the males in the group stared at him, waiting for his answer. Still, he didn't panic, calmly conveying his thoughts. "I understand your confusion. You might not know this, but the humans are Deathworlders with strong bodies, and not just one, but 2 extra senses than us. One of those senses allows them to detect vibrations in the air, so they would never be caught off guard by an attack. That's why we allow them in the lower gardens." The reason the lower gardens existed was that the humans preferred an environment without what they referred to as noise during their vacation. But before Ungox could explain this, that customer went on. "That's ridiculous! We saw no Murlac in the gardens, and the humans even let their children run around unsupervised. This is just unfair. But what do you expect from rules set by someone who hates their own species?" The whole group stared at Daala, the subtext of their personal attack not lost on Ungox. He exchanged a meaningful look with his wife, and just like that, the decision to stop being nice was made. "The rules exist for a reason, but if you want to see for yourselves why the human children are allowed to run free in the gardens, we have a video we can show you of what happened the last time the Murlac tried to attack them." Gone were the days when Ungox and Daala had to endure everything said by their species, and now they could afford to lose a customer or 1,000. The tall female tried to keep arguing, but Ungox did one of the rudest things one could do. He turned away from her while she was speaking and walked toward a big screen, where he ignored her as he searched for the security camera footage. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of them saying they would complain to the owner, but all he did was hit play and let them see the footage of the day the Murlac attacked the human children. It began with a calm garden, kids running around while their parents chatted by the tables. Suddenly, a large group of Murlacs appeared from the edges of the garden, their direction leading them toward a little girl with a hat playing by the lake. The adults rushed toward her, but the distance between them and the girl was significant, and any smart being could see that the Murlacs would reach her first. That's when a large dog noticed the commotion and rushed toward the group of Murlacs like a blur. Knowing what would happen next, Ungox turned toward the group of annoying Alir and noticed they had stopped complaining and were paying attention to the footage. When his eyes returned to the screen, he witnessed the greatest display of violence he had ever seen. The dog was biting the necks of the Murlacs as they fell to the ground one after the other, and every time they attacked, the dog either evaded or overpowered them, leaving yet another body on the ground. By the end of the footage, the group of Murlacs had been reduced by half, and the remaining ones were running back to where they came from. The dog, unharmed and wagging its tail, watched the retreating Murlacs as if ready for more. Noticing the surprise on the faces of the Alir as they remained transfixed on the screen, Ungox held Daala's hand and waited for their eyes to return to him. "If you still insist on going to the lower gardens, we can allow it if you sign a waiver of liability." His dewlap conveyed his final thought. "But let me share a business secret with you. There are no resonance barriers anywhere in that place, and the dogs are the only things keeping the Murlac away."